Hello and welcome to the first episode of 5-Year Windows on the Movie Gold YouTube channel. Each week this series focuses on a specific 5-year period of an actor's career by looking at all of their movies released during that time. On this week's episode, we'll be looking at the career of Julia Roberts from 1996 to 2000. Before getting to that particular time span, let's refresh ourselves with what Roberts had been up to prior to 1996. Roberts begins her meteoric rise to fame with a 3-film run from 88 to 90 with Mystic Pizza, Steel Magnolias, and then Pretty Woman, which were all 3 well-regarded movies that also had people raving about her performance. She even received her first 2 Oscar nominations for Steel Magnolias and Pretty Woman. This kind of success from a critical and commercial standpoint would lead you to believe that a big Oscar win was right around the corner for her. However, it would be 10 years before she ends up winning that elusive Oscar in 2000 for Erin Brockovich. Keep in mind that it was also her first nomination in 10 years at that point. She would spend the 1991 to 95 period with a few movies that had some box office success, like Sleeping with the Enemy, Hook, and The Pelican Brief, which all grossed over $100 million domestically, but didn't permeate culturally like her previous outings had. This leads us to the time period of 1996 to 2000, where she is working with directors that have some name value, and she is dabbling in a few different genres. We get period pieces like Mary Riley and Michael Collins. We also see her put her stamp on the Rom Com genre with My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, and Runaway Bride. Then she also delivers 2 dramatically rich performances in Stepmom and Erin Brockovich. By talking about these movies, we can chart this ascension for her back to the top of the mountain that ultimately culminates in Best Actress Oscar in 2000. I'm going to try and talk about these movies with limited spoiler material, but that may not always be possible, so be warned that I may be talking in more detail than you would like about the following movies. Mary Riley, Michael Collins, Everyone Says I Love You, My Best Friend's Wedding, Conspiracy Theory, Stepmom, Notting Hill, Runaway Bride, and Erin Brockovich. The first outing for Roberts in 1996 was Mary Riley, which came out on February 23, 1996. The movie tells the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from the perspective of his servant, coincidentally enough named Mary Riley. Originally, Tim Burton was slated to direct the movie, and he had been developing it for a couple of years with the expectation being he would direct after he finished with his passion project of Ed Wood. However, after Sony put Ed Wood in turnaround, this led to some bad blood where it was described that Burton begged off the picture. The job eventually went to Stephen Frears, who would be teaming up again with John Malkovich and Glenn Close from their Dangerous Liaisons collaboration. I didn't know much about the movie going in, but I figured a movie where Malkovich is going to play these different personas of Jekyll and Hyde is at least going to be fun to watch. Instead, it's fairly mundane and has the cadence and flow of a typical movie depicting the time period. This made me long for a movie directed by Burton that I imagine would at least be a little more visually inventive and have a more kooky take on the material. When it comes to Roberts, she is the title character, but the movie is more fascinated by the aura of Jekyll and Hyde. We are getting to use her character simply as a vehicle to provide a point of view to the audience. There are some moments where they try to color in her backstory even so slightly, but in the end, those things end up feeling a little more flat than they should, and I think it ends up bleeding over into her performance. She's doing her best here in a role where she's being asked to do an Irish accent, on top of trying to have compelling chemistry with 2 Malkovich personas. Roberts even mentions during the press junket, quote, "It was great stuff to play. It was fun. It was taxing, but it was interesting." Ultimately, I think what is being asked from her performance is a little too much to overcome, and it's evident in some of the other performances in the movie where no one seems to have that compelling relationship with Jekyll and or Hyde. Her next movie was Michael Collins, which was released on October 1st, 1996 and told the story of the noted Irish revolutionary played by Liam Neeson. This was directed by Neil Jordan as his follow-up to The Crying Game. The movie itself doesn't get to showcase Julia Roberts a ton, as she is the female member of a love triangle between the 2 main Irish revolutionaries that the movie is following. But I left thinking that she was delivering everything that you're looking for in a role of this size. Weirdly, this was the second movie in a row where she is tasked with doing an Irish accent, and it was much more consistent on this go-around, so I guess you could say Mary Riley did have some positive impact on her career. She was able to inject a sense of humanity into her character that kept her from feeling like solely an object of male affection. The movie allowed for her perspective to shine through more than just the male characters telling her about the relevant events and what that meant to the bigger story. On a side note from Roberts, I did come to appreciate a Liam Neeson that is playing this immensely important figure with quite a bit of fervor, without leaning into the excess like some of his more recent work tends to trend when he is hell-bent on revenge for his family. Arguably the biggest contribution that Roberts made to the movie was getting it made altogether. Director Neil Jordan said some years later, quote, "Although she was in a secondary role as Kitty, the truth is Michael Collins wouldn't have been made without Julia. She was the biggest star in the world. She was really interested in the script. She did it for the best reasons," end quote. Even with a smaller role in this picture, I feel like her contribution to apparently using her star power to get this movie made tells us just as much about movie star Julia Roberts as any other knockout performance that she has delivered. Her third and final movie of 1996 was Everyone Says I Love You from Woody Allen, which had its New York and Los Angeles premiere on December 6, 1996. This is a foray into the musical genre for Woody Allen, where he plays a neurotic, shocker, upper-class New Yorker who is having issues with women. This is a struggle of a movie for me because, like I mentioned, it is a musical, but every single song sounds the exact same to me. Unlike the last movie, where Roberts is able to seem more human in a smaller role, she's being used as a vessel for Woody Allen to fawn over and eventually manipulate into liking him. Another example of her doing the best she can with the assignment, but the scenes she has to share with Allen are best described as cringeworthy based upon the circumstances the script has thrust upon her. I don't want to get too deep into those plot machinations because they make me feel gross just talking about them, and I would rather spend the time talking about Roberts in other movies where there is an actual role for her as an actual human who has some kind of agency. This brings us to one of the seminal roles in her career in My Best Friend's Wedding, directed by P.J. Hogan and released on June 20th, 1997. This was the first movie in this period that I had seen before, so I was wondering if this was still going to hold up in high regard for me. If you haven't seen it before, the basic gist is her longtime male best friend, played by Dermot Mulroney, is set to be married to his fiancée, played by Cameron Diaz, in a few short days, and Julia Roberts is determined to put an end to it, just like any good rom-com would insist upon. But before getting deeper into the movie, I think director P.J. Hogan sets up the narrative so well from an interview in 2019 when he said, quote, "Romantic comedy is a really difficult genre. I think what kills romantic comedies is they often feel prepackaged or like frozen food that hasn't quite thawed. They're just not really fresh, but when I see the film, it's still got a snap to it. When it's funny, it's really funny, and the actors all glow, and I think Julia was extraordinary in the lead role. I mean, who else could have pulled that off?" End quote. As we mentioned, at this point, she's coming off a few years in a row of things not popping for her, and either movies and or roles that aren't letting her shine like she does when she's on her game. Her entire performance is predicated on the idea that you don't need to like her character, but you do need to understand her. Some of the things that she's doing are pretty awful, and you can see that it's seated in this desperation that she knows that this is her last chance to make her feelings known to the man that she thinks she is supposed to end up with. Which I think is more about what the movie is looking at. She doesn't necessarily love him like that. It's more that she thinks she's supposed to end up with him, and the door of her life is closing, and she's approaching that 30-year-old benchmark, and life is moving so fast that she feels like that she is losing that control. This performance is never going to get the acclaim of something like Erin Brockovich, but she is just as impressive in different ways with what the script is asking from her. In the role, she gets to turn the mirror on the rom-com genre and ask, what lessons do these stories really teach people? Do we really think it's okay for people to inject themselves into other people's lives and force their perceived happy ending on everyone? Ultimately, her ending dance scene with Rupert Everett, who is absolutely fantastic, is the fitting end to her narrative. What kind of happiness does she deserve? Does she deserve the true happy ending? Probably not. But the dance scene does give her that small moment of her smiling and still being able to enjoy life. And that's the kind of note these kind of movies should go out on, without having to force, again, that happy ending upon us. Her second film of 1997 was Conspiracy Theory, directed by Richard Donner and released on August 8, 1997. If you haven't seen this before, it's Mel Gibson playing a conspiracy theorist who believes he's being hunted by government officials. As you can imagine, it's Mel Gibson going really big for most of the movie, and doesn't feature enough quiet moments for me to key into beginning to care about him as a character. If I can't rationalize to myself that this person might be a real person, then I'm always going to struggle with making the leap to caring about them. Julia Roberts plays an employee at the Justice Department that Gibson has recently befriended that he hopes can help validate some of his conspiracy theories, namely that NASA is trying to assassinate the president. Logical, if you ask me. When I say that they befriended each other, I mean that Gibson rescued her from a mugging and now seemingly shows up at her work multiple times a week and insists on meeting with her. This is a herky-jerky movie when it comes to moving you from place to place while introducing the new threat, and then why they have to leave the current location for a new location to escape that threat. Similar to how Roberts felt when working with John Malkovich when he's playing these multiple different personas, she probably felt the same way with Gibson when he's going so big with this erratic behavior on a number of different occasions that it's probably hard to calibrate. Apparently on set, Mel Gibson even reached some Jared Leto level of antics by gifting her a small dead animal to, I guess, get into character. This is another instance where the chemistry isn't exactly on point with her co-star, but I think those are more problems with the script. To be clear, she's supposed to have a moderate romantic interest in a man who is at the very least a dangerous stalker, or at the worst has murdered her own father. what are we really expecting from her? In 1998, Julia Roberts has one movie come out, and it was the Christmas release of Stepmom, directed by Chris Columbus. The only thing I knew about this going in is that it was a two-hander between herself and Susan Sarandon. Sarandon is playing this supermom that her kids adore and she can do no wrong. However, Sarandon has recently split from her husband, played by Ed Harris, and he has a girlfriend, played by Julia Roberts, that is clearly doing her best, but can't seem to get on the right foot with these children, especially the nearly teenage daughter. What ensues is a rivalry between Sarandon and Roberts, where they are jockeying for control of their own situations and ultimately the affection of the two children. Trying to bring this cinematic narrative to life, apparently there was a lot of tabloid speculation that Sarandon and Roberts were feuding on set, which has been officially dispelled by Sarandon in the last couple of years, where she said that she found out it was a member of her own PR team spreading these rumors. When watching something like this, it's hard not to compare the two, especially when they're sharing scenes together. I truly do think it's a situation where they are matching wits with each other. Even when a scene is designed for one actor to gain the upper hand on the other, they are both adept at playing the heart-wrenching nature of each of their situations. Sarandon has this terminal medical diagnosis that comes to light in the middle of the movie that is going to deprive her of a future with her kids, and she is desperately trying to foster every positive memory she can while her time lasts. For Roberts, she is someone that self-admits that she never wanted children, but she is actually growing fond of them and desperately wants their affection and approval, but she knows she is being undermined even by the adults in their lives. I was blown away by my viewing of this because one of the realities of Sarandon's diagnosis sets in. This could have steered right into the weepiness, but instead, everything, especially in the last 45 minutes, feels so grounded that everything pays off all the way to the final moment when Sarandon asks Roberts to join them for the family Christmas card photo. It's so rare to even be fully satisfied by one character arc in a movie. Stepmom is able to let two parallel narratives play out over the course of 2 hours, where they both feel like they have grown as people, and that their stories have been fully told. This isn't a movie where I'll be able to rewatch this all too frequently, but I definitely will want to revisit occasionally, even if it's just for these performances. Next came on May 13th, 1999, with the release of Notting Hill by Roger Michell. This was another rewatch for me, and this ended up being the least surprising of those in a good way, because everything felt so familiar. Notting Hill tells the story of a romance between English travel bookstore owner Hugh Grant and American movie star Julia Roberts. The biggest marvel for me is this portrayal of a movie star, and more specifically a female celebrity at this time. Given this assignment, I could have seen a lot of other performers trying to overplay a lot of the aspects here, but instead Roberts plays it very quiet and confident in a lot of the moments. The reality is that she's a foreigner in a country doing a press tour, and she's gotten caught up in a whirlwind romance where she thinks, why not? I'll go to your sister's birthday party. I don't think this time period is a high watermark for her in terms of getting male co-stars to deliver on the charm side, as has been referenced before. But it was so refreshing, especially after watching the previous movies, to see someone like Hugh Grant burst into these scenes with a distinctive wit that never made me question why she might like someone like this. That's the balancing act at play for the entire movie. If at any point Hugh Grant seems too pathetic, then the believability for Julia Roberts goes out the window. She gets to have this confidence as a movie star, but also gets to be messy with how she handles some of these situations. It's a romantic comedy that doesn't shy away from the characters making mistakes and then asking for forgiveness, which when done well, illustrates some human truths, but when done poorly, is cheesy beyond belief. Luckily in Notting Hill, there is an authenticity that makes it such a delightful watch that my only complaint ends up being that there is too happy of an ending. It's a little too nice and tidy for me, and I wish there was more of a gray area. Instead, we get a universe where Hugh Grant and Julia Roberts are married and having children, so I guess that's not half bad either. The other movie that came out in 1999 for Julia Roberts was Runaway Bride on July 30th, 1999 from Gary Marshall. This is the movie that I had the most difficult time with. The character that Richard Gere is playing is downright despicable. To set the stage, Richard Gere is a columnist who waits until the last minute to write a story, so when he's on a tight deadline, a random man in a bar tells him the story of this woman in his hometown, played by Julia Roberts, who is notorious for leaving men at the altar. After hearing this 30-second story, Gere has all of the inspiration he needs to write this column. He does no follow-up work and just goes with it, with many factual errors to boot. He doesn't even speak to Julia Roberts' character before writing this article. At that very moment, there is no way in my life I'm going to be okay with a romance between Gere and Roberts. However, the movie spends the entire runtime trying to justify that to me. Gere and Roberts are fine. They have prior natural chemistry that makes them nice to watch on screen, but the words coming out of their mouths are utter gibberish. The one scene I will call out is between Julia Roberts and Joan Cusack's character, where Cusack calls out Roberts for being overly flirty with the men in the town. This conversation is well written, but it's very simple in a way that tells the audience that these two characters have a long friendship, and that they don't need a scene ripe with emotional confessions to tell a story. In this scene, I saw an example of the small town dynamics and relationships that might be more interesting for a movie, but I don't need that Richard Gere is now charmed by this small town life and wants to move there to complete his next great American novel. No thanks for me. This now brings us to the final movie for Roberts in this period, which was the movie she won her Best Actress Oscar for in Erin Brockovich, that came out in March 17th, 2000, from director Steven Soderbergh. This was another rewatch for me, and from the very start I was bowled over by how much she controls the screen. 5 minutes into the movie, and I was excited for myself that I was getting to watch Erin Brockovich again. Of all the movies we've talked about, the person she has the most chemistry with is Albert Finney in this movie. He also got nominated for his performance, but I think he was just as deserving of a win as she was. Erin Brockovich tells the story of a down-on-her-luck woman who gets a job at a law firm and becomes the driving force in discovering that a big corporation is contaminating the water of a small California town. This very serious court case where people are dying is at the forefront of the narrative, rightfully so. But the secondary narrative is the quest for legitimacy and respect that Erin Brockovich is seeking. She's mainly looking at it from her boss, played by Albert Finney. And there are big and small moments where you can see the proud eyes of a father figure take hold when she is absolutely owning someone on the other side of the room. You would think that the narrative pattern of Roberts calling someone out for their incompetence numerous times over would get old after a while, but instead you just get more excited for the next time that she's going to do it. The movie is undeniably a very Oscar-tilted type of movie following the true life of someone and their escapades to fight for a better world, but the magic is in how real Roberts makes Erin Brockovich. We get the moment when Roberts is on the road going door to door, and she has to hear over the phone from her boyfriend, played by Aaron Eckhart, about her baby daughter saying her first words while she is away. We don't get an emotional breakdown littered with tears. We get a look of resignation, that the only way to help these people affected by the negligence of PG&E is to miss some of these key moments with their family. I won't pretend to be devoid of bias here. This is one of my favorite performances of the 21st century, but I think she's 100 times over deserving of that Best Actress Oscar win. All in all, Erin Brockovich is a movie that delivers every time out, even if it's your first watch or if it's your rewatch. Despite all of the variety in the roles that Roberts played during this time, it's easy to see where this thought process was for her and what she was going for. She tries her hand at a couple of period pieces. She achieves some rom com glory, and I think most of all, she proves herself to be a legitimate force of nature as a dramatic actress, and ultimately achieves that highest level of respect that culminates in her Best Actress Oscar win. Thanks for joining me on this first episode of 5 Year Windows. If you could, leave a like on the video and subscribe down below. It would be greatly appreciated, and will keep you in the loop for when the next video drops. If you have some other actors or actresses you would like to see covered on the show, leave those suggestions down below in the comments. Our subject next week is going to be the career of Denzel Washington from 1991 to 1995. Again, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.